This DVD covers the first 40 years of aviation, powered flight and gliding, on the Gower Peninsula, which started here on Oxwich Sands 100 years ago in January 1911. The DVD will introduce the viewer to the air events held in the 1930s, the first glider flight from Fairwood Common, and the reminiscences of people who served at the RAF Aerodrome on Fairwood Common during the 1940s. The DVD also briefly covers the little-known site used by the US Army as a light aircraft airfield and camp at Skirlidge. The post-war years are covered up to the establishment of a flying school and club at the former RAF Aerodrome by 1951. The first powered flight in South Wales took place at Oxwich Sands, Gower, on the 19th of January 1911, when Ernest Sutton flew his Anzani-powered Blero monoplane to an altitude of 20 feet for a distance of 100 yards. On the 23rd of January, he made 3 more flights up to 100 feet for 1 mile, and on landing damaged the aircraft. He flew the repaired aircraft to a distance of 2.5 miles by the end of May, and to a height of 400 feet by the end of September. In the early 1930s, the people of Swansea and Gower were able to experience flights when, on the 28th of August 1932, a National Aviation Day display was held in a large field off Fenaway Lane, adjacent to Pennard Church. Sir Alan Cobham brought his flying circus, giving pleasure flights and aerobatic displays. Further displays were held in the field in 1935, the Jubilee Air display on the 8th of June, and the National Aviation Day display on the 26th of September, which was spoilt by low cloud and rain. The idea behind these events were for people to become more air-minded. On the 5th and 6th of June 1933, a display by the rival organisation known as the British Hospital's Air Pageant visited Parc Le Breos, close to Plenmine, bringing with them a number of aircraft, including a de Havilland Dragon. Alan Richards remembers the pageant.
I first flew an aircraft at Parc Le Breos in 1933, the British Hospital's Air Circus, I think it was. I think it was a predecessor to Alan Cobham, and a number of different types. We flew, oddly enough, my father agreed to pay for, not to pay for the flight, pay for the best flight, and he came with us. It was air cruise over Swansea. So a number of aircraft, Fox Moth I recall, Tiger Moth obviously, the great Idwal Jones with his Tiger Moth, with his Tiger, and various light, I think there was a Puss Moth as well. There was certainly a 504, and there was this formation flight over Swansea. But I was rather disappointed because airmen were supposed to wear leather helmets, would they? And had goggles on their forehead. I never knew why they had them on their forehead, because, motorcyclists had them over their eyes, but airmen, when you ever saw an airman, he had his on his forehead. It took a lot of working out. Anyhow, got into this aircraft, and it was like a little sloping tram car. And the pilot had a straw hat on. I mean, it was appalling. A pilot in a blazer. And I mean, he can't have been a proper pilot, you see. Anyhow, it was rather nice trip, and it certainly hooked me on flying.
May 1937 saw the first flight from Fairwood Common, when a young John Heyman flew a hand-built Zogling single-seat glider built by Harry Knott. The glider was known as Cloudhawk, and it was launched off a small hill on Fairwood Common.
I brought the plane used to bring the plane out to Fairwood every Sunday. Harry Knott was supposed to be the pilot. Time after time, we set him along the ground, never got off. And then the boys thought, Harry gave up. The boys thought, we'll have a ride in it. So they took it into a little ride on the ground. And Aubrey Williams said to me, John, you've actually built this machine. Why don't we have a little ride? And I thought of a way to get it off the ground. And stretched the ropes out, you let go. I pulled a step back and up I went. But I haven't thought then how to get it back down, so I crashed. A fortnight later we rebuilt it, took it back up to Fairwood, I took it up and I brought it down. Easy as that.
the rumour went round that there was going to be flying on the Fairwood Common, you see, and we all got on our bicycles and went up there. And there was two guys that I subsequently knew to be Harry Knott and John Heyman. And John Heyman was the intrepid pilot, and he'd got yards and yards and yards of heavy bungee elastic. And the idea was there were a couple of guys sat on the ground grasping the rudder, and I don't know, half a dozen or a dozen maybe lads and bears hangers on sort of rushed forward with this bungee rubber, and at a certain point the guys who were sitting on the ground digging their heels in, they let go of the tail, and you sort of escaped as quickly as you could when this glider did this sort of ground slide. It was able to get off the ground, but mainly because it was on sloping ground, elevated, slightly elevated ground where it was launched. But it was a genuine flight, but there wasn't too much gain of height.
In October of 1938, 3 parcels of land known as Fairwood Common was purchased by the County Borough of Swansea from Kilvrew Manor Estate, Fairwood Lodge Estate and Combe Tenant Estate, totalling over 1,100 acres of common land. The government in 1939, using the Emergency Powers Defence Act, obtained over 580 acres of Fairwood Common for the construction of a fighter airfield. Building commenced in the summer of 1940, where vast quantities of waste materials from Havertip in Swansea were needed in the building of the 3 runways, tracks, standings and foundations. Much heavy waste was needed for the construction of the airfield because Fairwood Common was so boggy. The airfield at this time had 3 tarmac runways, 3 bellman hangars, 8 blister hangars, and facilities to operate 2 fighter squadrons. The RAF requisitioned 3 mansions to accommodate aircrew: Park Labreos, near Park Mill, Kilvrew Manor, and Fairwood Lodge, near Upper Calais. The Royal Air Force took over the uncompleted airfield on the 25th of May 1941, and it became Royal Air Force Station, Fairwood Common, for use by day and night fighters. The airfield's location was 1 mile from Upper Calais in Swansea. In addition to the airfield, 13 domestic sites were constructed on land near Upper and Middle Calais for the accommodation of up to 2,000 personnel. The 14th of June 1941 saw Hurricanes of 79 Squadron fly into the unfinished airfield from RAF Pembrey. The first aircraft to land was flown by George Nelson Edwards. The next day, Squadron Leader Harvey Hayworth brought the rest of 79 Squadron into the airfield, and RAF Fairwood Common was declared operational as a fighter station within 10 Group of Royal Air Force Fighter Command. The squadron continued in their role as day fighters to protect the Bristol Channel ports and shipping in the Bristol Channel and Irish Sea areas. A few days later, Squadron Leader Harvey Hayworth was seconded to Rolls-Royce as a test pilot, and Squadron Leader Haysham became Commanding Officer of 79, or the Madras Presidency Squadron of the Royal Air Force. The aircraft used by this squadron was sponsored by the people of Madras, India, at the cost of £5,000 per aircraft, and the squadron ran a total of over 20 aircraft. This photograph shows Squadron Leader Haysham leading his flight commanders over Hendy. The next squadron to arrive was on the 18th of June 1941, when a detachment of Beaufighters, Mark II, from 600 City of London Squadron, commanded by Squadron Leader Stainforth, arrived. The purpose of this squadron was night defence of South Wales and the West Country. The fully laden Beaufighter was difficult to operate from the unfinished airfield at night, and the detachment returned to RAF Colon on the 27th of June, 9 days after they had arrived. A second Hurricane Squadron, in the guise of 317, Wilno Squadron, Royal Air Force, arrived on the 27th of June 1941. This Polish manned squadron was to enforce the day fighter role at RAF Fairwood Common. They were into action very quickly, when Sergeant Stanislaw Brzeski and Flight Lieutenant Szczesny brought down a Bf-109 near Brest on the 10th of July. Brzeski shared another victory on the 14th by downing a Ju-88 south of Tenby. The 7th of July 1941 saw the arrival of Lysander aircraft of the Air Sea Rescue Flight from Pembrey. Aircraft arriving and departing the airfield at Fairwood Common were controlled by staff in the watch office. Also situated in the building were the intelligence and the meteorological office. RAF Fairwood Common's fighter aircraft were controlled from an underground operations room at Weigwacht Lane, Cocket. The controllers received information of an approaching air raid from radar stations at Rawfton in North Devon, Ripperstone in Pembrokeshire, and the Royal Observer Corps. They would direct the fighter aircraft to intercept the raiding aircraft. 504 County of Nottingham Squadron, RAF, Flying Hurricanes replaced 317 Squadron on the 21st of July 1941, but it wasn't until the autumn that night fighters returned to the airfield. This time 125 Newfoundland Squadron RAF were equipped with radar-carrying Bolton Paul Defiant aircraft. The squadron provided night cover for RAF Fairwood Common sector until February of 1942. In October, RAF Fairwood Common took over from RAF Pembrey as the sector station, and the Air Sea Rescue Flight became D Flight of 276 Squadron RAF, the flight remaining until September of 1944. Aircraft of the Air Sea Rescue Flight would cooperate with RAF rescue launches to locate downed aircraft and flyers. Local Air Sea Rescue Marine Craft units were based at Swansea, Porthcawl, Barry, Ferryside and Tenby. Hurricane and Spitfire squadrons rotated through the airfield, and in February 1942, 263, Fellowship of the Velo Squadron, arrived with a new single-seat twin-engine fighter, the Westland Whirlwind. This powerfully armed aircraft suffered from engine and cooling problems and only operated with two frontline squadrons. 263 Squadron departed in April, with a detachment returning later in the year. Day fighter cover was provided by the Fairwood Common Wing, consisting of 402 Winnipeg Bear and 312 Czechoslovak squadrons. The wing only lasted a few weeks, with the squadrons leaving in May 1942, 402 to be part of a Canadian fighter wing and 312 part of a Czech fighter wing, respectively. The two Spitfire squadrons were replaced by 421 Red Indian, seen here flying over Bishopston, and 125 Newfoundland Squadron, which was equipped initially with a Beaufighter Mark II night fighter and then with a Mark VI variant. These Canadian and Newfoundland squadrons bore the brunt of the action through to October of 1942. Johnny Jones was a wireless mechanic in the Royal Canadian Air Force at RAF Fairwood Common.
So I was a wireless mechanic, so I was posted down to Cranwell. Went on a course down in Cranwell, and from there we went to our squadron. Canadian squadron was formed up in Lincolnshire. And we went from Lincolnshire then to Fairwood Common. That was when our squadron was being formed up. And at that time, we had a mixture of RAF and RCF, and it was a first-class working scheme. It was just a new airfield, all being built up. And virtually, we got used to the squadron because it just been formed up, and we used to go then every so often. We'd go and relieve squadrons all around this country, and places which I've since learned. I said, "Oh, we were there," but at the time I didn't know it was what it was or where it was. To be quite honest with you, and then we'd come back to Fairwood Common. This is why Fairwood Common was more or less our home base. The first thing I think I bought when I came over to this country was a bicycle. And my friend of mine and ourselves, we went down to this bicycle shop. This was in Thornaby in Yorkshire. And we each bought a bicycle, an Armstrong it was called. Supposed to be the best. It cost us £9 at that particular time. And wherever I went, I always took my bicycle with me. And one of the assets, well, a big asset was my bicycle when I was in Fairwood, because I had to go around to the whole of the dispersal, the whole of the airfield, and I used to put these two big calibrators on my shoulders and ride my bike, and away I'd go. And it was only because that had saved a lot of time, a lot of footwork, but my bike was very, very important. I fitted these communication radios to Spitfires, and they were fitted in behind the pilot's seat. which is a very, very awkward spot to get to. But fortunately, I appreciate the fact I wasn't a big fellow, so I could get in behind and do it. But it was always a very, very awkward job to do. And apart from that, I was in charge of the section, and we also had electricians in our section as well, and they had electrical work to do, and we sort of worked together on all that basis. And one of the things I had to do every day was to calibrate these radios to the change in the daily signal. And it was very, very hush-hush. You used to get the information come down in the morning, and then I had two calibrators I had to carry around into each aircraft. I had to calibrate the radio to the signal for the day. That was all very, very secretive. And and I was in charge of the section, and I was the only one who was allowed to do this. Nobody else was allowed to do it. A bus took us from Squadron, from Fairwood, into Swansea. And some of the boys went to the pubs, and others went dancing, whatever. And one of our favorite spots was the Patty Pavilion, and all the boys used to go there, jitterbugging and gorgeous. That was going on all the time, and that's where I met my wife. Yes. And we were married then, December '42. One of the most important things when I was there was I had to find the boys after our night out and bring them back up to Fairwood Common. And I walked from High Street Station to Fairwood Common several times with a couple of them in tow. You know, the worse the drink, a little bit the worse for the drink they'd had. I remember a couple of times having scrambles. And on just one case, you know, we weren't appreciative of the fact, but at that time we used to have aircraft flying in that area from Jerry coming over, and a couple of scrambles in that occasion. And one case, we had one of the pilots flying up on a sweep, and he looked across and he was flying right beside another Jerry. The two of them were flying together, more or less, and they both took off and broke off and that. But there was a big excitement that time when the pilot came back and he said, he's flying beside a Jerry. It was quite a new experience because the majority of the pilots were all comparatively new, young people just coming over to this country, and probably their first, more or less, flights involved in that sort of thing was at Fairwood. One of the instances I can remember in Fairwood was we had bullfighters, a squadron of bullfighters. I think they're Polish. And waking up one morning, and one was parked up and crashed right outside our billet. And I didn't even hear it. But bullfighters had a tendency to pull off to the left. They had this tendency, taking off, you know, pull off to the left. And apparently this is what happened to this bullfighter. He'd pulled right off the fairway, and he's right outside our window, crumpled up. No fire or anything, but just crashed there. Whilst we're all out working on the dispersals, doing whatnot, and we had an aircraft crash into our dispersal hut. And unfortunately, there was nobody there. It was all brickwork, and it was completely demolished. And I always remember that we were all out. One of us that had been in there could have been killed. And our hut, or our workshop, was in the north side of Fairwood Common, quite a well away from everything. And we had how many? What do we have? We had about 2 runways there, and we were sort of stationed at the far end of the Fairwood. I was in charge of signals, and I was approached by the transport division saying, "Look, we got a van, and you got to drive it." And I hadn't driven anything before in my life prior to coming there, and he was told me that this is what you, and he's taught me how to declutch, you know, pushing and declutching, and after that I had to drive it. But I had no problems. We used to go all over the country, and we put our best blues in our van and our bikes and whatnot, and we were quite independent in as far as the unit is concerned, and we'd transport ourselves wherever we went. People in Swansea were so keen on inviting you out. We went to so many places, and always with tea. But that was the story of my life over the whole of this country. People were put themselves out. They saved their rations, and you'd go up there and have tea virtually every Sunday.
That was going to be
Our station commander, there were two brothers. I'm just trying to remember their names now offhand, but the discipline was quite loose on the camp. There wasn't anything hearty, and we had excellent food. The food was excellent. Nobody would go out for tea. We'd stay in and have tea, whereas before in other stations we'd go out and have tea. But Fairwood Common, it was excellent food, really excellent. There was only one who was a commanding officer, but there were two brothers actually, and he had it very, very well organized. It was a lovely camp, an excellent camp, but discipline was. It wasn't sort of thing, be there, that sort of thing. He just made sure everybody enjoyed themselves and had the best of whatever was available. And that's why they used to lay on a bus for us every evening, going into Swansea and picking us up at 10 o'clock. We got to know a lot of people, an awful lot of people in Swansea. And I think basically my coming back to this country, apart from the fact that my wife came from Swansea, and we went back to Canada. We came back then. I came back on a visit in 1946, and I stayed. But I always had a terrific affinity for Swansea and the people in Swansea. Looking back on what they went through and the way they coped, I think it was marvelous. And I felt quite akin to them. I felt I was part of it all. My whole life, those years I spent in the Air Force were the best years of my life.
While Johnny Jones was at the aerodrome, the Canadian Manned 421 Red Indian Squadron were based at RAF Fairwood Common and RAF Angle between spring and autumn 1942. Art Sager was one of the young men who flew their Spitfire Mark V aircraft from their bases in southwest Wales. He became a flight commander in the squadron and went on to command 443 Hornet Squadron. RAF Fairwood Common often suffered with days of poor weather, and also wild horses would roam the airfield.
I went to London for my Met Office training. I can't remember exactly where it was. It was somewhere, it was above a store in Bossor Street, I think, in the middle of London, you know. I can't remember an awful lot about it, except that it was sort of fairly long, you know. But to be perfectly honest, I didn't know where Fairwood Common was. But we were just posted and we went, you know, there was no sort of arguing about it. We were just told where we were going to go, and we just went, you know. Came by train from London to Swansea Station. Then I think I must have got an Air Force transport or something to the station itself. Well, we did observation every hour and coded it all, you know, into figures. And then we passed that information to group, and they passed it to the headquarters, which at the time was, I think, in Dunstable, I think. And then they passed all that information to all the stations from then on, when they got all the information they wanted. But it gave all the information to all the stations, so they knew what the weather was going to be in their area. It was all coded into numbers, into sort of groups of 5-figure groups, you know, and depending on which number it was and the position within the group, you knew what it meant. So you had just to decode it and sort of plot the charts from that. I worked in flying control, and we did 2 days from 8 till 2, and then 2 afternoons from 2 till 10, and 2 nights from 10 until 8 in the morning. Then we had a day off, I think. It's got more additions now. It was just a sort of square building in those days, you know. But it's basically, the actual building hasn't changed that much. It's got bits added on, you know. I mean, this for instance wasn't here. We just had a naffy and nothing else, you know. We used to do an observation every hour, and we used to have to go right to the top of the building for, I think we had a rain gauge up there or something, you know. So we had to go right to the top, In fact, sort of coming back now, I recognise that staircase, you know. When I say the bits added on, I mean, you know, just a sort of basic flying control, and the Met Office was underneath, was on the ground floor. And that was more or less it, you know, apart from all odd offices, you know, but apart from that, there was nothing. Well, we used to do, for the height of the clouds, we used to fill a balloon. You know, we used to have a sort of an iron hoop. We used to fill the balloon until it filled this iron hoop, and we knew how fast it would rise, so we used to go outside and time it with a stopwatch. Well, this particular night, the first one burst, so we did another one, and we walked outside and we walked into some barbed wire, and that burst as well. So the third one we thought, well, no, we'll just go for it. And there was a little sort of, we used to have a balloon at night with a little sort of, almost like a sort of little cage thing with a candle in it. We used to watch this candle, and this blasted candle went out. So the I was doing it was a forecast, and he said, I don't think we'll bother, we just leave it. So we left it at that.
During the summer break of 1942, members of the University Air Squadron attended summer camp at the airfield. Alan Richards remembers his first visit to RAF Fairwood Common and his meeting with Wing Commander Richard Atcherley, who devised the DREM landing system to aid landings in poor visibility.
As a member of the Swansea University Air Squadron, we were attached, as it were, to Fairwood Common, and we used to visit there, sort of a day visit, and then at Easter and at the summer of 42, we did a summer camp there. My first impressions were with talking to various airmen. They sort of looked at us up and down, asked who we were, and we said we hoped to join the Air Force. And the general opinion was don't. It was an impression of chaos. People running to and fro, and of course we got no idea why they were running to and fro. And these immense queues for everything, queues for the cookhouse, queues for the lavatory, queues for everything. And frankly, it could have put one off a bit. But of course, flying, magic. And we did have the opportunity to fly in a Moth Miner, which was a marvellous aircraft. Very, very impressive thing. As far as I recall, it didn't have flaps as we know them. It had this sort of enormous perforated board underneath it. But anyway, it really was an experience. We were there was no sort of instructor as such, but there were Beaufighters there at the time, and any sort of spare Beaufighter pilot who fancied his chances took us up on a, officially air experience flight, but the fellow, rather foolishly, allowed me to take off. And I'll never forget that. Ease the throttle slowly forward, keeping straight with the rudder. And it really went down the Gower coast, totally unknown view, from the seaward, looking inward. And he did the thing that a lot of the boys I discovered did at Fairwood, was with a strong wind from the sea to approach the cliff top, very slightly below cliff top level, relying on the updraft to carry you over. Some of them were fairly laid-back fellas. During summer camp at Fairwood Common, we saw quite a lot of, I think then it was Sir Richard he wasn't Sir then, Richard Atcherley, who was wing commander at the time, of course he was succeeded by David Atcherley, his twin and indistinguishable brother. And he used to take a lot of interest in us lads, and I remember he asked me, why did I want to become a pilot in the Air Force? Well, I didn't like to tell him the truth, which was I thought everybody wanted to be a pilot, and joining the Air Force was the only way I could do it for nothing. So I said the usual sort of things and this sort of thing, and he looked at me very hard, and he said, the only chance you've got of sitting in the pilot seat of a Royal Air Force aircraft is that you are the best man we can find to be there, and that's something that's been with me all my life. there was a rather amusing answer. Another question one of my colleagues asked was, why can't we have tricycle undercarriages like some of the American aircraft are having now? And actually rounded on him and said, whatever should we want tricycle undercarriages for? And he said, well, they're easy to land, aren't they? The Americans might require them, but a pilot in the Royal Air Force is so adept at every sort of manoeuvre that landing a tailwheel aircraft presents no problems whatsoever. Well, in relation to the DREM lighting system, it was installed at Fairwood Common. There weren't many installations. It was rather expensive, and of course it was rather attractive to intruder aircraft, so it tended to be not used in the south and east of England, and was largely confined to night fighter stations. It consisted of a circle of lights, I think poles 10 or 12 feet high, with what looked like the sunken runway lights were stuck on the top of a pole, and they formed this circuit about 4 miles diameter around an airfield, so that you're looking for a particular airfield. Remember, there was no radar. Direction finding was very hit or miss. Even the radio. I mean, 1940, the Battle of Britain, there were single channel radios, you see, and it was only really 42, the 8 channel radio came in. And if you were away from your base, you didn't have the crystals in your set for this particular place you're looking for. So you flew and you found these lights, which gave you a much bigger target than just a flare path. And you immediately turned right and followed the lights around, kept the lights on your left, and followed round in a left-hand circuit until you found a digraph, which in the case of Fairwood Common was FC. And that was sighted above Ilston, behind Park Mill there. And you continued on, and where approached the active runway, there was a branch off, rather like the cat's eyes go off at a motorway exit. You exited down this one, that took you right to the funnel and to the threshold. I never used Fairwood Common DREM. I used it actually some year later at Cologne, by which time they'd got neon lights, sodium lights, and of course absolutely great in fog. And I had to fly into Cologne with no radio communication with them, in very bad visibility, and of course it was absolutely magic. You just sort of flew in the general direction, and when you saw a sodium light, you turned right, you saw another one, great, you're there, and you just fly around, you see the digraph, CL, and follow the lead-in. Marvellous system. I do recall when we were at summer camp, there was no night flying, everything was very still and quiet, and were woken by an aircraft, a single-engine aircraft, it was a Hurricane, taking off, and it was one of the Atchley brothers. Apparently they had some kind of telepathic communication, or allegedly so, and the other brother, who's down the south of England, apparently had some kind of mishap, and he, in the night, became aware of that and got out the duty crew and got out his black Hurricane and went down to the south coast to see what trouble was with his brother. Quite a remarkable thing.
Alan Richards became a sergeant pilot in the Royal Air Force, flying master tugs towing Hotspur gliders, which were used to train glider pilots on the run-up to the Allied assaults in northwest Europe in 1944. Interestingly, David Atchley succeeded his twin brother Richard as station commanding officer in April 1942. The photograph shows Group Captain David Atchley with officers and committee members of 215 Squadron Air Training Corps, including the Swansea Squadron's commanding officer, Sir Arthur Whitton Brown. In June 1942, Luftwaffe fighter pilot Armin Faber flew his undamaged Focke-Wulf 190 into Pembrey and became a prisoner of war. He was brought to RAF Fairwood Common by the station commander David Atcherley and was entertained in the officers' mess located at Black Hills Lane. The summer of 1942 saw RAF Fairwood Common subjected to a military attack exercise by members of the Swansea Home Guard. Alexander Imlach recalls the event.
In the summer of 1942, we had assembled to an exercise which entailed attacking the RAF at Swansea Airfield. The Black Watch, a number of men from the Black Watch were guarding the airfield at that time. They changed. In another couple of months it could have been the artillery. But this particular weekend it was the Black Watch. And the Gower Home Guard more or less got told off for leading them across the airfield with all the bogs around. They knew where they were going, but the Black Watch didn't. So they said it was unfair. And the RAF gave us a demonstration of dive bombing. We didn't think that was fair anyway.
The Spitfire Mark V that equipped 421 Squadron was replaced by the Hurricane 2C, and Turbine Light equipped Douglas Havocks of 536 Squadron in October 1942 and joined 125 Squadron to increase the night defences. The Havoc was equipped with radar and a powerful searchlight mounted in the nose. 2 Hurricanes would formate with the Havoc, which would illuminate the target for the powerfully armed Hurricanes to engage. The experiment was not a success, and 536 Squadron was disbanded a few months later, leaving 125 Squadron as the sole night fighter squadron at RAF Fairwood Common. Whilst Hurricane and Spitfire day fighter squadrons continued to take on the attackers during what was to be the final raid on Swansea by the Luftwaffe, which was a night raid on the 16th of February 1943, the target was Swansea Docks, and the squadron met with some success. A fleeing bomber released its bombs, and one fell on the airfield's dispersal site, number 5, situated off Hen Park Lane. Others landed in soft ground and did not explode. Sadly, 3 WAFs were killed and many injured.
The Germans were attacking Swansea, and they were presumably sort of chased away, and they dropped their bombs on 5 site, the WAF site, and some girls were killed.
Many of 125 Squadron flyers were lost in training accidents, including the loss of pilot Vivian Taylor on the 26th of February 1943. The tragedy was witnessed by local farmer Ted Solomon.
The first I knew of it, of course, was the Big Bang and the black smoke. And it seemed seconds, in which time the ambulance and the fire tender came through. Well, at the top of our yard, where the road bent, there was a telephone post, and the fire engine hit the telephone post, and all the wires came down in the road in front of where he was going to get to this plane. I was worried because I knew our animals were in a field down there. As a matter of fact, they were in the next field, and the plane crashed just the other side of the hedge. By the time I got there, the ammunition was going off along as the wings, I suppose, were heating up. So the ammunition was bang, 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 bang. The plane was facing in the direction that the fire engine would be coming from the roadway going down to the billets. Of course, they couldn't get any nearer. I don't know, I think they had to wait more or less until the plane burned out. But it was coming into land. I understand it came in a bit sharp, and the bow fighters, if you throttled back, they had a tendency to spin in. And it was Flight Lieutenant Taylor, his name was, and he was in it on his own, and he just crashed in. A lot of willows and woodland rubbish next to our hedge, and that's where it landed.
After 12 months of flying from Fairwood Common, 125 Squadron departed for Exeter. By the spring of 1943, the Ops Room had moved from Weegvark Lane, Forestvark, to a semi-underground bunker in Hen Park Lane, where the Duke of Gloucester paid a visit on the 14th of June 1943. Also by this time, runway extensions had been completed, with 2 short runways cutting across the A4118. For the rest of 1943, 3 squadrons of Mosquito long-range night fighters, numbers 307, 264 and 456, rotated through the airfield.
And we had some of the Poles in the Met Office with us because they spoke English, and a lot of the aircrew, of course, didn't. And we certainly didn't speak Polish. So I have a great deal of sort of sympathy for the Poles. They went through an awful lot to get over here, they really did. Newfoundlanders and Polish, and I think Czechs as well, and Australians. There was an Australian squadron. I've said to my daughter so often, we were very lucky because we mixed with so many different people that we've never have met in the main course of things, and it's very good for you. It makes you realise that people are people no matter where they come from, you know, and they're either nice or they're not, you know. It's the one place I was ever stationed where I was really sort of completely happy because the people around were so good to us, you know. They used to invite us into their homes, which never applied anywhere else, you know, but they did here. And the people of, I think the people of Swansea were absolutely great. They really were.
Using Fairwood Common as a base, these well-armed radar-equipped Mosquito aircraft of 307, 264 and 456 squadrons were able to provide air defence of the Midlands, southwestern England, South Wales and the West Country, as well as sweeps over Europe and the Bay of Biscay. By October 1943, the US Army had constructed a camp at Skirlidge Gower, 1 mile north of Portynan, as a base for elements of the US 2nd Infantry Division. This included the 37th Field Artillery Battalion. A grass airstrip was built at what became known as Camp Skirlidge Castle to allow light observation and liaison aircraft of the Artillery Battalion to be based there. The close proximity of the camp to Portynan Bay allowed the troops to carry out many amphibious exercises on the Gower beaches. These resembled those to be used for the invasion of northwest Europe. Group Captain Sandy Johnson became the station commander at Fairwood Common in October 1943. In the same month, 11 armament practice camp was set up with the arrival of target towing aircraft, and the station took on an additional role of preparing fighter bomber squadrons of the newly formed 2nd Tactical Air Force for the invasion of Europe. Many Spitfire and Typhoon squadrons honed their skills in air-to-air and air-to-ground firing over the ranges at Broughton, Margam and Mount Llochog. Time spent RAF Fairwood Common varied. Some squadrons only needed 5 days, others needed up to 3 weeks at the camp. Air Defence of Great Britain was set up on the 17th of November 1943. St David's Day 1944 saw the unexpected arrival of a US Army Air Force Thunderbolt at the aerodrome. Lieutenant Raymond Lancaster was on a cross-country flight from Atcham to Middle Wallop and was attempting to land his fighter aircraft on one of the 2 short runways at the aerodrome. The landing gear of his aircraft struck the cinder overrun of runway 34, and the Thunderbolt skidded down the runway on its belly, causing damage to its wings, propeller and engine. Fortunately, the lieutenant came out of the crash none the worse for his ordeal. Also the 1st of March 1944 saw the Mosquitoes of 456 Squadron being replaced by Beaufighters of 68 Squadron as part of the air defence of the southwest of Britain. The squadron's B flight was Czech-manned. The squadron was vectored onto raiders over Somerset and South Devon on a number of occasions, including on the night of the 14th to the 15th of May, when the Ace Myro Mansfield shot down 2 of the bombers. On the next night, 15th to 16th of May, Gilbert Wilde and his radar operator were steered onto an aircraft attacking Plymouth, instructions being given by the control centre at Hope Cove in South Devon to investigate. They intercepted a Junkers Ju-188 near the Channel Islands and shot it down. This was the last enemy aircraft shot down by a Fairwood Common-based aircraft. 2 tragic incidents involving 4-engine aircraft occurred in the spring of 1944. The first incident occurred on the 29th of March 1944. A United States Army Air Force Liberator bomber based in Italy was on a mission to Britain to collect radar equipment when it encountered fog over Cornwall and was diverted to airfields in southwest Wales. The Liberator, still painted in desert pink camouflage and the name Lorraine on the fuselage, was manned by aircrew from the 450th Bomb Group for this mission. Included were Harvey Helmer, the pilot, Jim Fleming, the navigator, and 4 other crew members. The cloud over the Gower Peninsula was down to 500 feet, preventing the crew from locating the airfield on Fairwood Common. Running only on the port engines and low on fuel, the pilot ordered the crew to abandon the aircraft. 4 bailed out and landed safely on the common near Fairwood Corner. The station commander, Group Captain Sandy Johnson DFC, took off in his Spitfire and briefly saw the Liberator flying into low cloud near Kevin Bryn. The pilot and crew chief were on board when the 2 remaining engines cut out just as the aerodrome came into view. The aircraft skidded across a field and came to rest in a hedge by Kittle Hill Lane. The pilot was injured, and the crew chief was very badly injured and sadly died of his injuries. The pilot met up with his surviving crew members and they were flown to Prestwick in a C-47 transport aircraft in the afternoon.
The Liberator, he crashed not far from the airfield and he was brought onto the airfield and he was made so welcome that he when we had a reunion, he came back, didn't he? Jim Fleming, yes. And we still keep in touch with him and his wife, just at Christmas, you know.
Soon, another tragic accident occurred. On the 9th of April 1944, a 4-engined Halifax II bomber of the 1658 Heavy Conversion Unit, based at RAF Pocklington, was on a night cross-country training exercise when it lost power on both outer engines. Attempting to land in the dark on only 2 engines, the aircraft crashed onto site number 4 in the late evening. Sadly, 1 WAF was killed and several others injured. The crew of 8 were okay.
Halifax crashed and it more or less flattened certainly parts of the WAF site, and the girl was killed and I don't know how many were injured, and I was injured and I ended up in Morriston Hospital with head injuries. It was quite late at night, about 11 o'clock I think. It was certainly dark anyway. The accommodation in the WAF site was built in a square and there were 3 huts, and the 4th part of the square was the ablutions. So 1 hut was completely demolished and half of the other one, which was mine, was also flattened. I was taken to sick bay and then on to Morriston Hospital because they couldn't sort me out there. And I went to Morriston Hospital. Head injuries. I've got stitches all around the top of my head. Well, if I'd been sleeping further up the bed, I'd been killed because it just caught the top of my head. But if I'd been further down, it probably hit me in the face or something, you know. So anyway, I was quite lucky, I think. Well, we lost all our clothes in the crash, and by the time we got out of hospital, there was nothing much left. So we had what was left, and my hat didn't fit. So I didn't wear it because my head hurt. And Sandy Johnson was in his car across the airfield, and he said to his driver, "Why isn't that wife wearing her hat?" So I told him why, and the driver went back and told him, and nothing more was said, but I still trotted around with no hat on.
With the build-up of forces for the invasion of northwest Europe, 41 Squadron left the practice camp on 24th of May 1944 for its base at Bolt Head.
Well, I was on until 10 o'clock at night, and I was on again at 8 o'clock in the morning, and during that time all the aircraft had been painted with the white stripes, which we knew nothing about, of course. We gathered something was up though, but it was done very quickly, because we used to take observations every hour, but before then we were told to take them every half an hour. So we thought something was up, you know, this was a bit strange. It must have been D-Day, I think. Well, it was the weather. I'm just jolly glad I wasn't the forecaster who has to sort of sort it out, because it was quite a short period, you know. It was sort of, and they had to do it then because of the tides. So, and in fact, I think they delayed it for 2 days or something, you know.
By D-Day, the 6th of June 1944, the troops, equipment and light aircraft of the US 2nd Infantry Division had left the Skirlage Castle camp and boarded troop transport and landing ships at Swansea docks, and were heading for the Normandy beaches to participate in Operation Overlord. The division was part of the follow-up force to the assault units and went ashore on Omaha Beach on the 7th and 8th of June 1944. With the beachhead established, small airstrips were quickly constructed, and the Cub liaison and spotting aircraft of the 37th Artillery Battalion were soon operating from French soil, supporting the ground forces in opening up the Second Front in Europe. Only 68 Squadron at Fairwood Common was left at the time of the invasion of Normandy on the 6th of June. The squadron left on the 23rd of June to regroup with new Mosquito night fighters. Fairwood Common was solely an armaments practice camp and received Typhoons of 257 Squadron on 11th of August 1944. The squadron had been flying from bases in Normandy since 8th of July of 1944. During the early hours of 3rd of September 1944, the weather over the west of England was very poor, and the weather over the Gower was good for a change. The sound of many powerful engines were heard over Fairwood Common as about half of the Stirling transport aircraft from 190 and 620 squadrons landed at the airfield during the early hours of that morning. This was because the aircraft were returning from a mission to resupply SAS, SOE and French resistance groups operating behind enemy lines in eastern Brittany. Later the same day, the Stirlings flew back to their base in Fairford, Gloucestershire. By the 1st of October 1944, Stirling and other transport aircraft had brought in equipment and ground crew from RAF East Church to relocate 18 armament practice camp at RAF Fairwood Common, alongside 11 armament practice camp. The first two squadrons to use the expanded facility were 193 and 331 squadrons, arriving on the 18th and 19th of September respectively. In December 1944, a 4-engined Lancaster bomber of 166 Squadron based at RAF Kirmington got into difficulties over the Brecon beacons whilst on a training exercise. The aircraft went out of control and 4 crew members bailed out before the pilot regained control of the aircraft. The bomber eventually force landed at Fairwood Common, with 3 crew members still on board. One of the crew that bailed out landed in a remote part of the Brecon beacons and sadly died of his injuries before he was found 2 weeks later. Throughout the remainder of 1944 and 1945, the war in Europe ended in May 1945, the two camps remained very busy. They merged to form one armament practice station on the 1st of July 1945. On the 13th of August 1945, Squadron leader Johnny Foster brought his squadron to Fairwood Common. During the squadron's 3-week stay, the war in the Far East Pacific came to an end.
I was doing medicine actually in Belfast, Queen's University, and there were 3 of us, and we all doing medicine. We were into our 2nd year medicine. 3 of us determined to fly. The 3 of us wanted to fly. So we joined up together. There was no conscription now, so we volunteered. And we joined up together, and we were deferred for several months before they called us up. But and then the 3 of us, we split up after initial training. I trained initially at an airfield called Mere in Stafford. Then I went out for SFTS, they called it, in Canada for 2 or 3 months, and then came back to the UK, where I joined the squadron. We did a conversion to accustom us to navigating in the UK, and we did this in Montrose in Scotland on masters. And that was mainly to get us accustomed to navigating in this country. and that was a few weeks, and then we joined the squadron. Then we went to OTU, operational training, in Harden, North Wales, and from there to squadron in Cornwall. I commanded 65 Squadron in Norfolk. This was in August 45. And there was an armament practice camp at Fairwood, as you probably know. And so I brought the squadron down in August to Fairwood for 3 weeks. And we did armament training there just after the war. Funny time to be training for armaments when the war was over. But that's what we did. We had 3 weeks here. And we were firing on towed drogues from Pembray. Well, our squadron were down in the western corner. There was a dispersal. And that's where we operated from. And there's the control tower. That's all really I remember. Hell of a switchback runway, which still is, I suppose. The officers' mess was where the golf course is now, the golf club. The officers' mess, sick quarters and so on was down in that area. And of course we were young, 12 pilots, 12 aircraft came down. And of course we'd, most evenings we'd go out for a pint to the Commercial in Calais and to Langland Bay Hotel. And that's where I met her, actually. Her cousins brought her down to the bar at the Langland Bay Hotel. We were all in there, packed in, you know, you holding your pint here.
Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, we met, and her cousins also from Gorsinan, they brought her. So I suppose I dated her and met her the next day or a day or two later. And then we went back to Norfolk, an airfield called Hethel, near Wyndham in Norfolk. And I remember she came up and stayed in the local hotel for a few days. And we continued our friendship. Got married in 1946 in Gorsinan, St. Catherine's. A week after we were married, I was posted to Japan.
The first jet fighter squadron to use the practice station was No. 74 Squadron, equipped with Meteor 3 aircraft. They arrived on the 7th of January 1946. It heralded a new sound over Gower. 2 more Meteor squadrons arrived, but both departed on the 20th of March 1946. 124 Squadron to RAF Bentwaters and 245 Squadron to RAF Cologne. In February 1946, the station commander at RAF Fairwood Common was Wing Commander Anthony Eyre. He was described as a very well-liked person. Sadly, he was killed in an air accident. Eric Williams remembers the station commander.
The station commander caught me one day bringing a rugby kit back from the gym because I was going to play with my home team, Hendy, because I used to live at home, being I had a compassionate posting here. And he caught me bringing this kit down and he said, "Are those rugby kit?" I said, "Yes, sir." "Who are you playing for?" I said, "My home team, Hendy." He said, "You're going to play for the camp," he said to me. Well, during the first 3 months, everything was fine, played with the camp, he was second ranking me, and came to the second 3 months, and I was posted overseas again. So I went to see him, and he got me off the draft. But during the second 3 months I was here, he took off from here to go to Gloucester, and he got killed on Stormy Down. He was a wonderful man. He was only, I believe he was the youngest wing commander in the Air Force at the time. He was only 32.
About this time, 70 Gliding School, commanded by Dennis James, moved from Venaway Lane Gliding Field to Fairwood Common, bringing with them the Cloud Hawk glider and 2 two-seat gliders to continue with the training of the air cadets at the weekend. The last Swansea University Air Squadron summer camp at RAF Fairwood Common was in 1946. Some air cadets were lucky enough to fly in the Oxford of the radar meteorological flight, which was now based at RAF Fairwood Common.
Originally, you started at Penachurch, where they pull you along the ground a bit faster, a little faster, and you keep the wings level, and you bounced a little bit, and you did what you call a lower hop, up to about 10 feet. More often than not, about 20 feet, depending on the winch driver. And then, when you finished, they brought you up to Fairwood, yeah, and they launched you off, up to 100 feet plus, depending on the winch driver. And that's about it. And to say that we weren't frightened would be... So we're going out on it, right?
It was more or less a soiled underpants now and again. Yes. No, it was very exciting. We must have been mad. At least.
595 and 691 squadrons departed by the end of October 1946, leaving only the 86 gliders at the airfield. The station went into care and maintenance under the command of Wing Commander Hallows. Hallows left in March 1947, the station coming under the control of nearby RAF Pembrey. Finally, 70 Gliding School closed at the end of October 1947, and the RAF deactivated the airfield and relinquished control in early 1949. A number of personnel who sadly lost their lives while based at RAF Fairwood Common are buried among the other Commonwealth war graves at St Hilary's Church in Calais. At the last count, 66 squadrons used RAF Fairwood Common, and some with more than one visit, and about 40 squadrons made use of the armament practice camps or the armament practice station. Despite obtaining land on Fairwood Common in 1938 to build a municipal airport, the county borough of Swansea did not take over the former RAF aerodrome. Instead, a group of local businessmen set up Swansea Flying Club and initiated the Flying Club movement at the aerodrome with an air pageant on the 2nd of July 1949. The club was rebranded Swansea and District Flying School and Club on the 5th of May 1950, going on to host air races and rallies to firmly put the aerodrome on the aviation map by the summer of 1951. This DVD has been produced to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the RAF aerodrome being declared operational on the 15th of June 1941. A second DVD will be produced to cover the development of civil aviation at the aerodrome from 1951 to 2011.